Peggy's doing the handouts for me.
Two here.
This is a long speech from this volume. It requires internet assistance. I haven't gone into all the detail that it requires. I did send out an email last week to get some references for anybody curious to read up on it. My topic tonight is container ships. And why we have them. We'll start, take a look at your first photograph on the top page. Here's San Francisco, waterfront. Probably sometime between 1960 and 1972, still has the Embarcadero Freeway, Bank of America, but doesn't have the Transamerica building, so that's how I date it. As you see, the waterfront is covered with piers. Has anybody here ever seen a cargo ship unloading in downtown San Francisco?
No.
It's been a long time. I've seen them, but I've been in and out of this area a long time. Those typical cargo ships we used to see were called break bulk ships. That's because their cargo was broken down into small pieces for handling. Contained with bulk cargo ships are things like tankers, grain ships, and so on. If you look at your lower picture there, that is how a break bulk ship was loaded or unloaded. See the railroad tracks, see a crew of people, see them lifting up bundles. The bundles are cargo nets. If you look along the ship, there's a cargo net near every hole, so if something falls off in the pier, it won't go into the water. The Embarcadero had railroad tracks on it, and railroad tracks to every pier. Usually three, one on each side, one or two into the interior sheds. Dock work has been the same for the last 100 years. The only change, the last change, was steam power for the winches. And typical shipping cargoes had to be handled at least 4 times. The shipper had to crate it, send it to a freight forwarder who selected a pier where the appropriate ship was going to come in, sent to the pier and stored. Ship came in, unloaded, and then the freight shipment had to be hauled out to the pier by the longshoreman, lifted on a crane, put on over the hold, sent down in. The crew working the ship would store it very tightly. The cargo on the ship had to be stowed very tight so nothing would move when the ship rolled. All this handling is in small bits, manpower, they carried it, hand trucks, very labor intensive. When the ship was finally stowed, everything was tied down with timber so it couldn't move. That was called dunnage. As the cost of labor went up, it cost more to load the ships than it did to transfer the cargo. Longshoreman work was dangerous and difficult. There was no steady work, depended how many ships were in. There were a lot of complaints about corruption in hiring. The work was unionized in the 20th century, and usually competitive unions, and it got pretty vicious fighting. San Francisco had a long general strike in 1934. It was finally settled by the federal government. And they set a record in that type of settlement. It was a total victory for the longshoremen. The longshore workers had 27 years of total control of the labor process on the waterfront. They made all the rules, all the hiring rules, set the costs. Shipping companies had to comply. So for the unions, this was the golden years. For the companies, they didn't agree with that. They rejected all labor-saving devices. The labor contract had finally changed in 1961 with the first agreement of mechanization. Meanwhile, nationwide, the shipping companies are trying to find some ways to reduce these costs. They're looking at some type of containerization or other areas to modernize. One of the problems was the Interstate Commerce Commission. You may have heard of it. It was our first regulatory commission set up in 1887 to regulate the railroads. By the 1920s, they regulated the railroads, trucking, and shipping. They were made part of the Department of Transportation in 1866. They were closed down in 1980. Terribly bureaucratic organization. They prohibited any coordination between rail or truck or shipping companies as non-competitive. Finally, in the 50s, railroads got permission from the ICC to carry truck trailers on flat cars. Some of you may have seen that. They had a lot of problems with it because the trailers are 35 feet long. They built 70-foot flat cars. Then a little bit of lobbying, the trailers got 40 feet long. We had to build 80-foot flat cars. A little more lobbying, and they got 45-foot flat cars, and kind of petered out. They couldn't match them up. The shipping companies really did not want containers. They didn't want to have to buy them, didn't know how to keep track of them, and didn't want to bring them back empty. Guys got to be sure where they were. A lot of discussion, no action. In the early 50s, one small trucking company, McLean, on the East Coast, got permission to ship trailers to Puerto Rico on, they call roll-on, roll-off ships, row ships. They're basically big floating garages they could drive the trailers on. But the ICC said, if you own a shipping line, you can't use your trucks. Their competitors had to handle the trucks. It was very bureaucratic, but it worked. McLean expanded the trailer ship to most of their East Coast and Southern Coast ports, from Houston to New Jersey. In 1959, McLean got an award from the Maritime Commission for their trailer ship program. Some years later, McLean Trucking got permission to start container service to Puerto Rico from New Jersey. They didn't have any containers. They used trailers. They used truck trailers and modified, took the running gear off, so they could run, tow the trailers up to their ships. They rented some piers with heavy cranes and lifted them on in New Jersey. They were deck cargo, they tied down, went to Puerto Rico, and unloaded them on the trailers again. I was in Puerto Rico sometime in the 60s with the submarine force and saw those first time. The company was called Sea Land. It worked pretty well. So they decided, with as laws changed, design their own containers instead of using truck bodies. So McLean designed the first containers with the 20-foot size, and they designed what is called the automatic container lock. Look at page 2 on your handout. Looks very simple, but it's a very, very good device. It's now used worldwide. The first 2 pictures there show them mounted on trailer beds, truck trailers, other mounts that are on the ship. They're mounted rigidly on the ship deck or on the trailer deck. Set the container on it, and it locks on. The container has an oval-shaped hole in each corner. The lock makes a 90-degree turn and locks. And the container cranes can unlock it when they try to lift. So this can lock the containers down. It's only used for deck load containers. It's not, the ones that would go inside the ship are inside of rails, and they don't require the locking. This is now used worldwide. It made it available to all our competitors immediately, so others copied it. Then the National Standards Institute in the United States set standards for U.S. containers. 8 feet wide, 8 feet high, lengths divisible by 10. So they made them 10, 20, 30, 40-foot lengths. Army built a lot of 10-foot ones. They call them Connex boxes. If anybody visits the military base, you'll still see them standing around. They use as offices and storage. Yep. So the shippers all use larger ones. They require all the handles, hinges, and hardware to be recessed so they can be slid down within their container cells on the ships. In '72, the International Standards Organization, ISO, adopted the US standards. They use, so here's the international system, this metric and everything else, containers, 8 feet wide, 8 feet tall, 20 or 40 foot long. The only thing I know of ISO is not metric. And container ships use the term TEU, 20-foot equivalent units, even though they carry different sizes. The ships are defined by 20-foot units. There's a number of other options that are available now. They have what's called a high cube unit. These are 8 foot wide, but they're 9.5 feet high. They're used for very lightweight storage equipment. And there's a lot of refrigerated ones. They have a refrigeration unit in it, they're insulated, and they will run on ship's power. They have their own diesel generator and fuel tank, so they can run on trucks and trains, carry refrigerated goods and control various temperatures, either be frozen or various temperatures set. They're used around the world. There's tank containers for liquids. Looks like a railroad tank car set inside a square frame so they'll stack properly. And some that are called, they're half height, only 4 feet high. If you're carrying heavy loads like pipe or I-beams, you can't fill a container with that, it's too heavy. So they have the half-high ones. Well, who owns these containers? No one has the answer. Everybody does. Some shipping companies do, some investors do. It's kind of like railroad boxcars. They travel all over. The owner may never see them again, but he gets the rent every month, and the shipping company gets the cost for shipping. And there's this international organization.
Visiting hours for adult services are over in 10 minutes. Thank you for your cooperation.
It controls all of this. I worked for Transamerica Company. They had a division that owned containers and loaned them out. I haven't seen any of their name anymore because they don't travel that far. It's like railroad boxcars. The owner probably never sees them again until they're destroyed someplace. Empty containers have to be returned. Some companies, many countries only import or only export. The shipping companies say if they didn't return them, they'd all end up in Saudi Arabia. So usually, I've been away from ship design now, they're getting larger. 20 years ago, the top 2 rows on the external side of the ship were usually empties being returned, but now they're 4 and 5 high, so I don't know what the design rules are anymore. 1969, the first scheduled container ship left San Francisco. Matson Line started a weekly service to Hawaii. Go to your third slide, please. Here's a picture of a modern container ship. Upper view, lower view, it's a different ship because the bridge is a different place. That's the cutaway, how they're built. The ship is full of what's called cells, which containers slide into. Those same locks container locks can change 220s into a 40. And your final picture shows how they load a container ship. The ship's dockside. The left picture shows them loading on the weather decks, locking the other. Right view shows them down inside in the container cells. Container ships need a large laydown area because you have to be sorted. You have to be very careful you can get the right ones in the right place. It's all planned ahead of time. You want the heavy ones in the bottom and the last ones off towards the bottom. So you don't want to unload a whole lot to get at the other ones. So they're sorted out on the ground, loaded in the proper order. We need this space. Finger piers don't provide it. That's why container ships in San Francisco all went to Oakland. In New York City, they all went to Staten Island or New Jersey. Container ships are what they call volume limited. They're limited generally by the number of containers they can get aboard. Containers aren't that heavy. They're seldom loaded down their maximum draft, whereas cargo ships were draft limited. You could load them only down to your draft mark for the season. There's summer and winter draft marks for ships. And a lot of empty space in them most of the time, depending on the weights of the loads you had. Container ships getting larger and larger. You ought to make them that won't go through the canal. But the Panama is building a new set of locks that'll take these new container ships. When those are open, I predict the traffic in California will decrease because they'll go from Asia through the canal to the East Coast. Now we have express trains that take containers from Oakland and Los Angeles and go to the East Coast in 3 days. There'll be less traffic, but container ships are our future. The old cargo ships are gone. Anybody has any questions? Reading material here to make available. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.